Hi, my name is Richard Hale and welcome to the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery. We're closed because of the coronavirus, but we're open to you for tours like this one, so you can still visit us. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and pay my respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, the First Nations community in Tasmania. Aboriginal people have been living in Tasmania for at least 40,000 years. We're on Muwinina land. The Aboriginal people here, the First Nations community, are the traditional owners of this land and the continued custodians. Because of the history of what happened here, there are no Muwinina people left, but the community is still very strong, the First Nations community is still very strong around Tasmania. And I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. Now, if you tuned into us last week, we talked about the Tasmanian devil and the quolls and some of the other marsupial carnivores, and I thought we'd continue that this week by talking about this animal, which again is a carnivorous marsupial, but it's one that's no longer with us. So let's go and have a look in this dark room over here. So welcome to the Thylacine gallery, the Tasmanian Tiger gallery. Come and have a look at this one in the case, and you can see why it gets its common name. So the Tasmanian tiger, it's a marsupial. It had its young in a pouch, and it's called the Tasmanian tiger commonly because of those stripes on the back of its body. So a completely different animal to the Tasmanian devil. You know, we saw the devil, it's a small black animal with sometimes a couple of white stripes or patches on its body, like a small dog. Whereas this one is a fawny brown colour, and it's got these stripes, multiple stripes, up to about 20 or so, that are dark brown or black on the body. And that's where the common name Tasmanian tiger comes from. It didn't only live in Tasmania though in the past. There is rock art of the Thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, in Western Australia and the Northern Territory. We think what happened to it on mainland Australia was that when dingoes were introduced, a native dog was introduced by a later wave of Aboriginal migration, just 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, that the dingo, because it could have lots of pups and could hunt in a pack, it was a much more efficient predator than a Tasmanian tiger was. And so it outcompeted Tasmanian tigers on the mainland. The dingo didn't get to Tasmania because of Bass Strait. The sea level rose after the last ice age and cut Tasmania off from the rest of mainland Australia, and the Thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, survived down here. Now the stripes, we think are to do with camouflage. So this is an animal that's a hunting animal, running probably fairly slowly through the bush, through open country, grassy forest, not thick rainforest, through that open forest where there's lots of grass in the understory and the shadows of trees and grass, and the stripes probably helped to camouflage it from its prey. So that's where the Tasmanian tiger, the stripes, give it that common name. I have a real love for this animal, and it was kind of one of the reasons why I came to Tasmania a long time ago now, because I always wanted to try and find one. I haven't found one. I found them in here, but not in the bush. And I just thought I'd show you one of my treasured possessions, which is a little model of a Thylacine, a Tasmanian tiger. You can see the stripes on its back quite clearly. Some of you who visit the museum regularly might recognise this specimen from a jar in the museum cart, in that wonderful cart with all the jars and the drawers that open and close. Now, the name we usually use this animal is Thylacine, and let's come over here and look at the sign where it says that name. So Thylacine just here. Now, you know, all plants and animals have a scientific name, the genus, the first part, and the species, the second part. And the Thylacine, its scientific name is here, Thylacinus cynocephalus. So Thylacinus cynocephalus means the pouched dog with the wolf head. So it has a pouch, it's a marsupial, just like a wombat or a kangaroo or a possum or a Tasmanian devil. So let's start by talking a little bit about how it has its young in the pouch. Let's go over this way. So on the last tour about the Tasmanian devil, I showed you this image of baby Tasmanian devils on a 20-cent piece and the actual 20-cent piece here for scale. So again, with the thylacine, the young are born really small, like a little jelly bean, the same as with a kangaroo or a wombat. You might remember the baby wombat in the jar just here, that tiny little thing. And the thylacine, the female has 4 nipples in her pouch, so she could have 4 young that would grow in the pouch and then emerge when they're older. And we haven't got any really small, real specimens of thylacines here today in the gallery because they're very rare and extraordinarily valuable. So they're not the kind of things that I'm allowed to handle. But I do have a couple of models and some images of the ones that we do have in the collection. So there's an image here of some of the pouch young that we have in the collection. So they're preserved in ethanol, alcohol. These are some of the ones that you might have heard of when scientists have been attempting to get DNA, the genetic material from these ones, in an attempt to recreate the species. We don't know how to do that at the moment. We may never know how to do it, and yeah. There's a little model of one of those pouch young in a jar just here. Again, it's not the real thing. It's just a model that we use in our teaching collection. And this one is a slightly bigger one, and again, it's a model, it's not the real thing. So you can imagine the young this size, not much fur at all, still being in the pouch, attached to a nipple, drinking milk and growing. And again, like the other marsupials, mostly breeding in the autumn, so the young are in the pouch through the winter. And then they can emerge when the weather gets a bit warmer and there's a lot of young animals for them to eat and for their mother to eat. Now, let's just have a little look at the movie because I think there's a bit coming up which shows some of the animals in the zoo in London, and there's a bit at the end where you can actually see a mother with a pouch hanging down. So, just there. You might have to come back to that one, but there's another little bit in a minute. Just here, see this female? There's a bit of a pouch hanging down just there at the back. You can watch this again when we're finished and you might be able to see those too. So that's just a mother who's had young in a pouch and the pouch sort of skin is hanging down at the back of the animal. Come and have a look at a couple of photos over this way. Here's a lovely photo of a female with 3 young. These ones weren't bred in the zoo in Hobart. They were captured in the wild. She may have had them in her pouch, or they may have been following along behind. But it's a wonderful photo. It's kind of a really sad photo too, because we know now that they're extinct. But you can see this mother with her 3 beautiful young. And there's another image of her on the wall over here. Come and have a look at this one. So here's the mother in the middle, and then the 3 young. So, like with a lot of hunting animals, the young would stay with the mother for quite a long time, so they would learn the skills to hunt. It's a dangerous, difficult thing to learn to hunt other animals. You don't want to get injured because then you can't catch your food and you die. Just like, if you think about an actual tiger, the tiger mother will keep her cubs with her until they're able to hunt, and then they can separate. So yeah, here's the mother with the young. So young in a pouch, just like those other marsupials, like wombats, Tasmanian devils, kangaroos. But the other thing about its scientific name that we said, remember the pouch dog with the wolf-like head? The wolf-like head. Let's have a look at the skull and the skeleton of the animals. So there are two skeletons in this case. The one that you're looking at now on my left is the male skeleton, and then there's a female skeleton on the other side. The male skeleton, it's larger. The bones are kind of bigger, stronger, more robust than in the female skeleton. And at one stage, scientists early on thought that they were two distinct species, but now we know that it was just the difference between male and female. The skull itself, see if I can keep that light on. Here's the skull again. They do have a really wide gape. A bit like with the Tasmanian devil, they could open their mouth quite wide and use that as a threat display to kind of keep other animals away or to warn other animals. You know, if they were cornered or something and something came near them. So it'd be a bit of a fright to see that skull opening like that in front of you. Again, like the Tasmanian devil and other predators, they've got that sagittal crest, the crested bone on top of the skull, where the muscles from the jawbone would come up and attach to give it a good biting power. But if you compare it to something like the Tasmanian devil, here's the devil's skull, here's the Thylacine skull. I was talking to the retired senior curator of vertebrate zoology, who's a thylacine expert, Catherine Medlock, on the phone the other day. And I mean, she was trying to explain a lot of these things to me because I'm not an expert and she is. Sadly, she can't be with us today for this tour. She was comparing the Tasmanian devil to something like a bulldog. You know, it's short and squat, it's got this really thick skull, it can hang on and grab on and not let go. Whereas the Thylacine's built more like a greyhound. You know, it's kind of long and skinny. It's got a big head, but if you take the head away and look at the skeleton, it's quite slim and it's got a very narrow chest. So it's the kind of animal that might run through the bush, pick up the scent of an animal, especially something, you know, small or weak or injured, follow that scent until it finds the animal, wear it down a bit, and then rush in at the end to grab it. So very different kinds of animals, but a hunter. And it has a head like a wolf, according to its scientific name. Let's go and have a look at a wolf head and compare it over this way. So in the case in front of you, you've got three different skulls on this shelf. On the left, there's a domestic dog skull. Now, domestic dogs really vary in the shape of their skull, shape and size of their skull. I mean, you know, think of a Chihuahua compared to a Saint Bernard. So this is a kind of a sort of average dog skull, if there is such a thing. In the middle, you've got a Thylacine skull. And then on this side, on the right-hand side, you have the skull of a wolf. The dog and the wolf are placental mammals, like the dingo, like us, like whales, cats, cows, bears, giraffes, elephants. You know, the baby grows inside the mother's body, it's attached to a placenta, and that special organ feeds the baby. The blood that feeds the growing baby comes through the placenta. And the baby's born fairly well developed, but obviously still needs to be looked after by its parent. Whereas the Thylacine is a marsupial, so the young are born really small like a jelly bean, and then they do their development in the pouch drinking milk. So they're not related to each other at all, the Thylacine and the dog, or the Thylacine and the wolf. But because they have a similar lifestyle and a similar role in the environment, it's what we call convergent evolution. Two unrelated species have evolved to look similar, because of their role in the environment. All three, the dog, the thylacine, the wolf, are running, hunting animals. So they've evolved jaws, skulls, that are perfect for being a running, hunting animal, for running after prey and grabbing prey and catching prey, killing prey, eating meat. So it's an example of what we call convergent evolution. Another example that people often think about is, if you compare sharks with dolphins and the extinct ichthyosaurs, those marine reptiles that are extinct now, they all have really similar kind of bodies and they have similar habits and diets, but they're completely unrelated to each other, but they look similar. So the thylacine is a great example of convergent evolution. Let's go and have a little think about, actually I'll show you another specimen over here. Remember that male skeleton we were looking at? This one here in the case. Well, there's a photo of that one when it's still alive over here. So here it is as a younger animal at the zoo in Battery Point, Beaumorisseau in Battery Point, which was in Newcastle Street. So this is the zoo before it moved to the Domain, where it was known as the Hobart Zoo. And this young male thylacine here, apparently it was tame enough to be put on a collar and a lead and was walked around the zoo and sometimes out of the zoo, and it was quite a common sight in Battery Point in those days. Now, if we move over to these photos over here, we've already talked about how thylacines were running, hunting animals. Now, before European people, before white people came to Tasmania, thylacines would have hunted, small mammals, wallabies, that sort of thing, and birds that lived on the ground, things like native hens maybe. When Europeans came here and introduced sheep and other livestock, sheep and chickens, thylacines started killing those things, or at least the reports were that they started killing livestock. And so they were hunted. Now, they were the top predator at the top of what we call, the food web. If you think about the top predator, there's never as many of the top predator as there are of their prey. And there's never as many of their prey as there are of the food that the prey eat. So if you think about a really simple food chain, you might think of the thylacine at the top, wallabies in the middle, and then grass at the bottom. Lots and lots of grass. The wallabies eat some of it. Quite a lot of wallabies. The thylacines eat some of them. Hardly any thylacines. Now, when people started hunting the thylacines because they were hunting their livestock, or so they said, they killed more than 2,000 of the animals, and that's a lot of the top predator to take out of that ecosystem. So, something bad had to happen. So more than 2,000 bounties were paid from 1888 to 1909, I think. And the numbers of thylacines went really low, and then they became kind of really valuable as live specimens for zoos and also as specimens for museums. Now there's another specimen in this case here. Come round and have a look. This is a male thylacine that was caught in the 1920s, I think, by a well-known snarer and trapper called Paddy Hartnett. And if you're a keen bushwalker in Tasmania, you might think of Duquesne Hut on the overland track in Cradle Mountain Lake St Clair National Park, and you may have been to Hartnett Falls, a beautiful waterfall near that hut. And so Paddy Hartnett was a trapper. The trappers and snarers used to go up into the highlands in the winter to trap and hunt animals because the winter fur coat is thicker than the summer one, and so they would snare mostly possums and wallabies, but they would sometimes catch other animals too. And Paddy Hartnett caught this animal. It was actually taxidermied by Alison Reed, who was the daughter of the curator of the Hobart Zoo on the Domain. And it's an amazing specimen. You can see the size of that big head, but then the really narrow body, great big eyes, yeah, so they would have used their sight quite a lot, but also excellent hearing and a great sense of smell. Don't know if you can see the whiskers on this one. The whiskers show up quite well on the skin, and of course you can see the stripes on the back of the animal. So the thylacines were hunted and they became really important and valuable specimens for zoos and for museums. Maybe we'll go back and have another look at some of the film footage. So here's that female in London Zoo. These other ones are from Balmoral in Battery Point, and then some from Hobart Zoo on the Domain. When you look at the animals, try and see, obviously the stripes. There's a really thick base of the tail, so it's not like a dog's tail. See that thick base? And in some of this footage you can see the thylacines using their tail to support their weight a bit. They put their tail on the ground, not like a kangaroo, not sitting up like a kangaroo, but to help support their weight. Those big eyes, ears and nose. Look at this one, see its tail on the ground there, kind of giving it support. Yeah. And also look at the length of its back foot. So they have a pad that actually goes right up to that joint there, and they sometimes put their whole foot back down on the ground. There isn't any footage of the last Tasmanian tiger, the endling they call that. The endling is the word for the last of an animal before it goes extinct. It became extinct on the 7th of September 1936. So this year, that's 84 years ago. And we remember that date every year as Threatened Species Day. And that's a really good opportunity to make a decision, remake a decision to make sure that we don't let other animals go the same way as the thylacine. Let's go and have a look in the case again, because that's not the end of the story. Lots of people think they're still out there, and there have been a lot of searches, and there's still a lot of research going on. So let's go back to the case. I was talking before, I'm a bit all over the place today. Anyway, I was talking before about how the specimens became really valuable for museums. At the back, you can see a photo of a thylacine specimen in the Florence Museum in Italy. And in front you've got these two specimens of a porcupine and a marmot, a crested porcupine and an alpine marmot. Now these are the specimens that TMAG swapped for the thylacine. So we gave the thylacine to Florence, and Florence gave us these two animals. Some of the other things in this case, actually down the bottom, this is quite an interesting skeleton. It's got all the bones laid out. See the red colour of the bones? That's because it was dug up from the earth on the northwest coast of Tasmania, that lovely red soil that's so good for growing vegetables, and it's stained the bones in this skeleton as well. And this skeleton has another little Tasmanian story. It was dug up by Professor Theodore Thompson Flynn, who's the father of the famous Hollywood actor Errol Flynn. So there's some nice little Tasmanian connections in this case. Just in the middle here, you've got a couple of thylacine skulls up the top, and if you look closely you can see they've been bashed in at the top. These were animals that would have been trapped, probably along a snare line, where a trapper has put snares out to catch other animals for fur, and has also put snares out to catch thylacines, because the thylacines and the devils would go along those trapping lines and eat the other trapped animals, and the snarers didn't like that for obvious reasons. There's a little hatchet here that trappers might have used to kill a thylacine, and then there's some snares just here on this side. Okay, so hunted to extinction, the last one dies in a zoo in Hobart in 1936. But that's not the end of the story. there's been a lot of people searching for it ever since. Some people have put out remote-controlled cameras, motion sensor cameras in particular places where they think there might be thylacines, and this is an example that I think the Parks and Wildlife Service might have used. The Parks and Wildlife Service, here's an old response kit, so if someone saw a thylacine in the national park that they were visiting, then the park staff would go into action. And there's a specimen in here of some plaster casts of some tracks that were taken in, I think, 1938 in the Jane River area of Western Tasmania. And these may well be the last evidence of a living thylacine that we have. So people went for a search in that area. They didn't find any thylacines, but they did get these tracks. They did find tracks, and then they made plaster casts. I've got a plaster cast over here just to show you what I'm talking about. This is a plaster cast of a Tasmanian devil's foot. It's the front foot, and there's a little picture of the front foot of a Tasmanian devil. So not the thylacine, not the Tasmanian tiger, the Tasmanian devil. See, it's got this little thumb here, and then it's got 4 toes up here, and quite a big pad on its foot. And that's one of the things to look for if you're looking for tracks. The difference between a devil's foot and a dog's foot. See how the dog's got this triangular pad and then 2 sets of toes? A devil or a thylacine footprint's very different to that. It has a much larger foot pad, and then the toes are sort of arranged in an arch, not 2 and 2. So there's a big difference between those tracks. So people are still looking. Officially, an animal becomes extinct when there's no evidence for it after 50 years. So officially the thylacine became extinct in 1986, which is quite a long time ago now. But there are still people searching. Now that's still not the end of the story, because we've got a collection of thylacine specimens in the museum, and museums are about specimens, and our specimens are really important because we're still learning more about the thylacine by studying those specimens. So that includes studying the skeletons, looking at the bones, scanning the bones, working out how strong they are, what sort of prey could they actually kill, how fast could they run. You can work out those kinds of things by looking at the skeletons. And then the pouched young have been really important as well. So remember this photo of the pouched young in, we'll get the light, this one here. Here's a model of that one here. And here's a photograph, a scanned photograph of that same young. And with technology nowadays, we can look inside the body without cutting it open, without damaging the specimen, and learn a lot more about it. So this is that same animal looking inside. So we've got its whole skeleton scanned, and we can even look at the different tissues in its body. So we've got its brain here. You can see its lungs in yellow, its heart here, its liver and its kidney. So scientists have been learning a lot about the specimens that we still have, and one of the main things about the pouched young specimens is trying to work out the growth rates and how the animal's body changes over time. Remember, the young marsupials are born with the front end really well developed, so they can climb into the pouch and attach to a teat, but the back end hardly developed at all. And so scientists were interested in working out the age of these specimens and their their growth cycle. So now we know that this specimen that this model's based on, the specimen just here, is 9.5 weeks old. So in the pouch, 9.5 weeks old. That's how big the babies were. Now, just to finish up, I've said before that it's a marsupial. it's not that closely related to the Tasmanian devil or the quolls. Its closest relative, but not that close at all, happens to be, coincidentally, another stripy marsupial. A little endangered marsupial from Western Australia called the numbat. It's a coincidence that it has stripes. So a long, long time ago, the thylacine and the numbat had a common ancestor according to the genetic sequencing that they've done of these two animals. But yeah, the thylacine is a marsupial. It's related to other marsupials, not related to dogs or wolves, even though it looks a little bit like one. I reckon that's a good time to finish. Probably a good time to think, what can I do to make sure that no other threatened species go the same way as the thylacine? You know, whether that's, making sure you don't drive too fast at night and run a Tasmanian devil over, or making sure you keep your cat inside so it doesn't kill birds or small mammals at night. Maybe it means going out and planting some trees and making some habitat in your garden for native species. There are threatened species all around us. Thanks again for coming along. I'd really like to thank Veronica again for helping us with the filming. I'd really like to send a big thank you out to Catherine Medlock, the now retired Senior Curator of Vertebrate Zoology and thylacine expert that taught me a lot about the thylacines in this gallery and some of their stories. Thanks for coming, and we don't know yet what we'll be doing next week, but come back and see us then. Bye.